Hey everyone, I'm Matt from RoyalCaribbeanBlog.com. I've spent almost 15 years writing and covering Royal Caribbean, and today I'm here to answer your questions from the internet all about a Royal Caribbean Alaska cruise. Here we go. Today I'm going to grade some of the tips about going on an Alaska cruise to maximize the experience and tell you if it's a good idea. Number one is from RZR632. The absolute best cruise we've been on. Get a balcony if you can. Sitting on the balcony wrapped in a blanket with hot chocolate, watching the landscape was incredible. I do agree with this tip in principle. It is absolutely fantastic, and this person is absolutely right that when you're on a balcony or really anywhere on a cruise ship, you can absolutely see fantastic vistas out there. The problem is, like, everybody wants to get a balcony on a cruise. They have this image in their head of these glaciers passing by and enjoying the view, and rightfully so. The thing is that balcony cabins and suites, because they also have balconies as well, are extremely expensive on an Alaska cruise, more so than the Caribbean, because the value of the view you get is substantially higher. So, should you get a balcony? If you can afford it, absolutely. But if you could save, let's say, $1,000, $2,000 by not getting a balcony and getting an inside cabin, I would totally do that. So I'll give this tip an A-. Tip number two is from DPIP, bring some binoculars. I've heard this tip from my very first Alaska cruise, and we actually did it. And bringing a pair of binoculars is cool. There's no doubt. There's a lot to see around you, and in a lot of cases, some of the best things are not nearby. Eagles, other wildlife, of course, mountains and glaciers. You might be able to get a proper view of it. I get that. The thing with the binoculars, the problem is that, number one, most people don't own binoculars. And to invest in a pair of binoculars for one trip, it can really not have a great ROI. While it would be very useful for you, I'd be afraid that it would be completely useless once you got back home. My best advice is to borrow a pair of binoculars from somebody that already has one, or if that's not possible, buy like the cheapest pair of binoculars on Amazon you could possibly find that are not for children. The reason being that it's going to do the trick. You're not looking to get professional grade stuff out there. It's just going to be overkill for what you're looking to do. I'll give the tip a B with the caveat that it's not entirely necessary. You have a great cruise without it, but it certainly is nice to have it. Our next tip is from Fuzzy Tutor 6168. Sail out of Vancouver, not Seattle. SeaTac is terrible, as is the port. Vancouver Airport, on the other hand, is much nicer to fly in and out of. I don't know that I agree with this particular tip. There are two particular ports you almost always go on in order to go on an Alaska cruise, either Vancouver or Seattle. Vancouver does have a couple advantages, one of which is that you're likely to go to some more exotic ports. By having your ship go out of Vancouver, then your cruise ship does not have to adhere to the Passenger Vessel Services Act, which is a rule of the United States. And if your ship begins in the United States because it's foreign flagged, and long story short, it just makes your itinerary more limited. If you cruise out of Vancouver, you can do a lot more interesting things and go much further into Alaska, also you're a little bit further north, so that helps as well. There's a few problems with Vancouver. Number one, their port can't handle all the big ships. Number two, while their airport is lovely and probably better than Seattle, I have no idea, I will simply say that there are far more flights to Seattle. Not only that, flights to Seattle are also cheaper, especially if you're an American. There are far more flights that go in and out of Seattle from around the United States and even internationally than go into Vancouver. More flights equals more competition, which generally means lower prices. It's simpler. It also does not require a passport like it would in Vancouver, and this makes it a lot easier for Americans who don't have a passport. I really don't think there's anything wrong with taking a cruise out of Seattle, especially if it's your very first time cruising into Alaska because of the logistics involved. So for this tip, I'm giving it a C-. JM Cookie 25 says waterproof shoes are important if you're doing anything outside. It can rain at any moment, raincoat too, and layers. So we'll get to the layers in another tip here, but the waterproof shoes are important. I don't know that having waterproof shoes are truly important or worthy of putting on anybody's packing list. It's nice if you do have them, and if you're intending to hike, like really hike, go out into a hiking trail, then yes, I would agree this is really important. You should get it. For most people who are doing more pedestrian type activities that are not involved and don't go into the wilderness, so to speak, I really don't think waterproof shoes are that important. Yes, it does rain a lot in Alaska, and so you're going to get wet. But I think the likelihood that your regular shoes are going to get so soaked that waterproof shoes are going to be so important is unlikely. In the sense that, number one, your activities were going to be more indoors or it's more protected than going on a hike, as I mentioned earlier. And number two, I also think that rain showers in Alaska tend to be a little more short-lived. The weather in Alaska changes a lot. It's more than likely that when you wake up in the morning, the weather you have at that moment is probably going to be different than it's going to have later in the morning, later in the afternoon, in the evening. You get it. It changes a lot. And it does rain, but it's usually not an all-day soaker event, but it could happen. Even so, I just don't think buying waterproof shoes similar to binocular is going to be a worthwhile investment. Certainly, if it's an all-day soaker, you can change some of your plans to some extent. Also, if you're doing Royal Caribbean shore excursions, they tend to be a little more indoors, you're a little more protected. Again, unless, of course, you're going hiking. In that case, then yes, I agree. Now, I do agree a raincoat is a good idea. It's part of a bigger tip, which is about layers. And when you go to Alaska, you're going to need to pack for layers. And this is a very important concept. When you're packing for Alaska, because the weather is so dynamic, you need to have variability. So when you want to have on any given day is a base layer, which is usually t-shirt, pair of jeans. Then you want a warm layer, something that's going to keep you warm when it gets a little chilly out. Usually a fleece or a sweater is a really good middle layer. And then you want what JM Cookie 25 said, which is a waterproof layer, a raincoat, something light that you can easily take on and take off. That way, you can always remove or add layers. If it's hot out but it starts raining, you can just put the rain layer on, right? The waterproof layer, and keep your t-shirt and you're good to go. But if it gets really cold, then you put on your fleece. And if it gets cold and rainy, well, then you put all three on. More important than that waterproof shoes is definitely a waterproof backpack, so that way you can keep all your layers in your bag if you don't need them. I'll give this a B- because, of course, there is truth to why this is necessary, but it's more about the other things he wasn't alluding to than the stuff that Jam Cookie was alluding to. Someone whose account was deleted wrote, if you're booking an excursion, double down, check how long travel times are to and from the boat. This could eat up a lot of your port time if you want to explore. Well, besides the fact that he said boat and not ship, because they're ships, not boats, but I digress. The tip is a really good one, and this applies to pretty much any shore excursion anywhere around the world, which of course is that if you're booking a shore excursion on your own, you can save some money, have more choices in your tours, but you need to manage your own time because the cruise ship will leave you if you're not back in time. My personal advice is no matter what tour you pick, you want to be back probably 2 hours before the all aboard time, or at least plan to be back 2 hours before all aboard time. Now, obviously, if you're doing a tour that goes well into the wilderness or takes you further from the port, you want to make sure that the tour will get you back in time. Now, admittedly, most shore excursions you find, almost any shore excursion that deals with cruise ship passengers knows this. This is not a surprise to them and does them absolutely no good from a business perspective to have you miss the ship. And so these tours are definitely curated for tourists, and more specifically, almost all of them are curated towards cruise ship guests. So they're going to get you back almost certainly with enough time. However, this person is absolutely right. Never assume, never rely on other people. And my advice is to give yourself plenty of time. I said earlier to assume 2 hours before all aboard time, which is the time in which you need to be back on board the ship. There's a sign when you disembark the ship near the gangway as to what that time is. Anyway, I'd plan to be back 2 hours beforehand. Now, that accounts for some padding, right? What if there's traffic? What if something takes a little bit longer than you expect? And, a gargantuan delay would be like an hour. That still gives you an hour left to do. So I do agree with this tip. I'm going to give it an A, and it's really important, but this applies to anywhere, not just Alaska. Basher Squared wrote, book travel through air to sea. It saved our ass. Original travel was Seattle to Chicago to Vancouver, but when we were on the tarmac in Seattle, Chicago issued a ground halt that lasted 3 hours and missed our connecting flight. Air to Sea booked us from Chicago to Seattle to Juneau, transfer from the airport to a hotel smack in the middle of downtown, travel to the airport tomorrow morning, and a puddle jumper from Juneau to Hoonah with a transit to Icy Strait Point to get to our ship. I am wildly impressed. There is absolute truth to air to sea, and air to sea is how you book a flight through Royal Caribbean. The primary advantage to booking your flight through Royal Caribbean instead of booking it on your own or through anybody else is a situation like this, in which a travel delay that is completely out of your hands prevents you from getting on board the ship and missing the ship, and then Air to Sea Royal Caribbean will work with you to get you over there. Now, I need to warn people that this is for things that are out of your hands. This is not a backup for you booking a flight the same day your cruise departs, and something that could have been avoided prevents you from getting on the cruise ship. You always want to book a flight at least one day before the cruise begins. I really don't know if Basher Square did this or not, but I'm telling you, if you book your flight at least one day ahead of time, the chances of you running into a situation that Basher Squared run to are extremely unlikely. Because even if there's one flight a day and it's canceled, well, you did it at least a day ahead of time, so there'll be a new opportunity the next day going forward. The other thing with Air to Sea that you want to keep in mind also is you have the choice when you book through Air to Sea is to pay the fare immediately or wait for final payment. And the problem with Air to Sea, if you don't make final payment or at least full payment for the airfare, is that sometimes the actual ticket isn't actually issued for you. You're going to go on the flight, don't worry. But it can cause some issues potentially with like seating and things of that nature. Anyway, my advice with Air to Sea is if you're going to do it, make sure you pay for your flight immediately so that way you get your ticket issued to you at the time, and it absolutely can be worthwhile. The real downside to air to sea is the fact that there is a fee associated with it. It's pretty nominal, not a lot, but yes, you will pay more through air to sea than if you were to book it directly on your own. And I would also say, and all that being said, if you're flying domestically, as in you're an American, you're flying in the United States to Seattle, I would say air to sea is probably not that important. If you take my advice and come in at least a day ahead of time, that strategy works really well. But if you're doing international travel, if you're coming from overseas, or heck, if you're taking a cruise over to Europe as an American, air to sea is a great idea. So I give this tip an A. M, pre-order. O, do not book excursions through the cruise line. Do your homework. Book directly with the shore excursion company. You'll save about 50%, and they'll be the same exact companies. This tip is like 50% true. I mean, yes, you could save money, and yes, you could find the same exact company that the cruise line uses. So there's truth to it. I'm not saying that he's completely wrong in this one. I will just simply say that I wouldn't go as far to say is do not book your shore excursions through the cruise line. There are some really important reasons to book with the cruise line. Number one is the guarantee the cruise line has. First of all, they're going to vet the tour operator. Not that most tour operators aren't great, and you can find some good information online to make sure that they are in fact reputable, and you can vet them yourself, but some people don't want to do that. Number two is the cruise line guarantees that also that they'll get you back on the cruise ship. So they work with the tour operators. And if the tour operator is running behind, maybe something breaks down, there's an issue, what have you, if they're running behind to the point that the cruise ship was set to leave, they can radio ahead or call ahead, whatever the case may be, and of course coordinate with the cruise ship, and the ship will either wait for you a little bit longer or Royal Caribbean will get you back on the ship to another port. This is a really important consideration, and for a lot of people, this peace of mind is absolutely worthwhile. I would not go as far to say also that the generalization that you'll save about 50% on booking directly. I mean, obviously this can run the gamut. Sometimes you absolutely can't save a ton of money. Sometimes it may be only a couple dollars. So I give this one a C- because while there is some truth to it, I wouldn't go as far as say do not book excursions through the cruise line. I think you need to weigh both and find the right choice for you. Far, Far Away Travels wrote there are over 700 cruises to Alaska each summer. It can be a nightmare for a new Alaskan cruiser. Find a travel advisor who specializes in Alaska cruises. They can answer a zillion questions, probably add some gifts like onboard credit, and it costs the same as when you book it yourself. I agree with this tip 100%. I think it's a great thing. This is true of all cruises in general, but if you're looking down your very first Alaska cruise and you're trying to figure out all these things, not only are you going to be able to get tips and answers like here in a video like this, but inevitably there's a lot of personal things like, should I get this cabin versus this cabin? And not because one cabin is superior to the other, but because your family and your needs are very unique to yourself. And a travel advisor who specializes in cruises can help answer those type of questions. A good travel advisor is somebody who, number one, is reputable. I always tell people you want to find a good travel advisor by asking friends or families for a recommendation. Number two, they should also have experience with, of course, either the company or the type of travel you're talking about. There are a lot of travel agencies out there, and certainly one that does a lot of business with Royal Caribbean or cruises in general, or heck, Alaska cruises, would be more advantageous because they have personal experience they can lean on to help guide you through the process. Also, equally important, make sure that the company you use has no extra fees. There should be no service charges for what they offer you. Cruise lines charge fees, certainly, but a good travel agent should not charge you service fees, cancel fees on top of whatever the cruise line does. Some of them do that. I don't agree with it because, of course, the cruise line is going to be paying them a commission for their services, and part of being a good travel agent is servicing your client, in my opinion. I give the tip an A+, and it's something I recommend to everybody, whether you cruise once or 17,000 times, it's always worthwhile. Snoopets 8873, start, stop. First rule of cruising is never assume anything. Always check. It's safer that way. Departures from ports, flight time, shuttles, excursions. Never assume. Double check whenever you can before you book. Look at the full itinerary to make sure the ship is starting and stopping where you expect. My goodness, what a great tip as well. When you're talking about booking a cruise, people have a preconceived notion in mind. They have this image in their head, I think, of what they want. And a lot of times it's very easy to look at a TV commercial or a snazzy web page and think, this is what I want, because the marketing imagery kind of matches what this person has in their head. But there's a lot of nuance in cruising. There's a lot of little things that you need to account for when you're picking the right ship, the right cruise line, the right destinations, the right excursions, the right drink packages. I mean, everything along the way. I don't want to scare anybody when I'm telling you all of this because it's actually a lot easier than it sounds. Heck, if you're watching this video, you're already like 8 steps ahead of everybody else out there. The bottom line is never just go into it blindly. Do your homework. That is an important thing. I think that's Snoopets8873 saying, so A+ for this one. And lastly, Dear Ginger wrote, I really don't know what current cruise fares are, but I don't think you can do Alaska for $3,000 and also include the outside excursions. I'm guessing $3,000 inclusive of tips. Car parking will just get you on the ship with main dining room, buffet, meals, tea, and water. Can you do an Alaska cruise for $3,000 or less? Yes, but you're going to need to be very selective and very creative with how you do it. First of all, you're going to need to pick a time of year in which there's a lot less demand. Alaska cruise season is very short. It usually begins in about May or so and ends by September, especially we're talking Royal Caribbean. Suffice to say, you're not going on a luxury cruise line or even a premium cruise line. You're almost certainly on a mass market line like Royal Caribbean. Second of all, you're going to need to go in the shoulder seasons, May, early June at worst, or definitely September. These are the months in which most people do not want to go on a cruise. Why? Because these are the months in which school is in session and also the weather is not nearly as warm. I have oftentimes found the best prices for these, especially September. May is really good too, but if you can wait and kind of play it by ear, there's a lot of last minute deals on September cruises that I have found, but that's more, your mileage may vary. The bigger challenge more than cruise fare is going to be the other add-on costs. Airfare especially is huge, and shore excursions. They cost way more than in the Caribbean. So if you're trying to get under $3,000, number one, don't book any shore excursions. Simply walk around and explore the ports. Alaska is a very easy place to explore on foot without a formal tour. The cities that you go to are pretty easy to navigate. Whether it's Juneau or Ketchikan or Sitka, there's a lot you can do on foot. You don't need to book tours ahead of time. And if you're watching these kind of videos, then you're already ahead of the game anyway. But you can find a lot of cool DIY type excursions in Alaska, see some cool things without spending a dime over there. In addition to that, I do agree with Dear Ginger that you're probably not spending any more money on board the ship in terms of, especially dining or drink packages. You're going to be prioritizing that on cruise fare and airfare. But if you're creative and crafty, you could do it for $3,000, but it's not going to be easy. So I'll give this tip a B-. So there you have some of these Alaska cruise tips I found over on the internet. Let me know your thoughts on them. And if you agree with my assessment of these cruise tips, and of course, let me know in the comments below your best Alaska cruise tips down there. While you're down below our video, hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, so that way YouTube lets you know of a brand new video to share. This has been Matt from RoyalCaribbeanBlog.com. We'll talk again real soon.